Mr. Beat presents Presidential Elections in American History.
The 59th presidential election in American history took place on November 3rd, 2020. Then again, by that day, a record number of Americans had already voted early, either in person or by mail. You see, for most of the year, the world was in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. The virus hit the United States particularly hard. Around 20% of all COVID-19 related deaths in the world happened in the United States, despite the country making up just over 4% of the world's population. By election day, it had killed around 235,000 Americans, and many blamed President Donald Trump. Compared to other world leaders, Trump was slow to respond to the pandemic and originally downplayed the severity of the virus. Not only that, the economy was doing worse than it had since the Great Depression. Businesses closed and suffered due to lockdowns after local politicians tried to slow the spread of the virus. Unemployment got as high as almost 15%. Despite wages slowly ticking up in the previous 3 years, nearly half of all Americans still lived paycheck to paycheck, meaning when the economy crashed in 2020, they had no savings to get them by. Trump also became just the third president in American history to be impeached for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress after he allegedly tried to get Ukrainian officials to dig up dirt on Joe Biden's son to hurt Biden's election campaign. More on that in a bit. Well, the Senate acquitted Trump, with nearly every Republican voting to keep him in office. But it wasn't just the impeachment. Throughout all the turmoil of 2020, the Republican Party consistently stood by President Trump. He had a loyal, cult-like following, as seen by his many rallies with enthusiastic supporters. However, Trump also had lots of enemies. Throughout his presidency, the traditional news media attacked him. Don't worry, he attacked them right back.
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President, I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse me.
President.
That's enough.
Trump lied more than most politicians. So much where it was kind of hard to keep up with all the lies. And he nearly got the country into wars just from seemingly impulsive tweets. But he also accomplished a lot for conservatives, at least attempting to undo much of what Barack Obama accomplished, getting 3 Supreme Court justice nominees appointed, as well as lots of federal judges, lowering taxes, reducing regulations, and beefing up military spending. He even led some bipartisan criminal justice reform. Still, all summer long saw a resurgence of Black Lives Matter protests as police brutality continued to be a big issue, as seen by the horrifying murder of George Floyd. The Democratic Party did not stand by Trump. Throughout his presidency, Trump had been one of the most unpopular presidents in modern American history, and many Democrats thought they could easily take him. 29 major candidates tried to get their party's presidential nomination, the most for any American political party since 1972. And now I shall list all 29 of them. Just kidding. Although I will mention a lot of them because it was an interesting and diverse group. First of all, there was Tulsi Gabbard, a U.S. representative from Hawaii, Kamala Harris, a senator from California. She dropped out of the race before the primaries began after Gabbard made her look bad. There were 2 candidates who seemingly came out of nowhere, Andrew Yang, an entrepreneur from New York, and Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Buttigieg, or Mayor Pete, perhaps since many couldn't pronounce his last name, was the first openly gay presidential candidate to win a presidential primary or caucus. There were also 2 billionaires who basically bought their way into the presidential race. Tom Steyer, a New York City hedge fund manager. Oh yeah, we all love hedge fund managers, right? And Michael Bloomberg, who after he made his billions, was the mayor of New York City. Let's see, who else? Oh, Amy Klobuchar, a senator from Minnesota. Elizabeth Warren, also a senator, but from Massachusetts. Oh, and Bernie Sanders was back. Yep, after basically renewing a progressive movement within the Democratic Party when he ran for president in 2016, the senator from Vermont was back with higher support than ever. And finally, there was Joe Biden, the former vice president who entered the race truly believing he was the only one who could stop Donald Trump, despite the fact that he was now 77 years old. That said, this presidential election had a lot of older folks. Sanders was 78, so was Bloomberg. Trump was 73, Warren was 70. Hey, it's all good. It was 2020. People were living longer. Wait, what? Oh. Oops. Yeah, the life expectancy had been going down since the last election. Well, long story short, at first it looked like Biden wouldn't get the nomination, and that Bernie Sanders was in fact the front runner. This freaked some people out. Mostly, they got scared of what they thought socialism was and associated Sanders with what they thought socialism was.
We are living in many ways in a socialist society right now. Problem is, as Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us, we have socialism for the very rich, rugged individualism for the poor.
What a wonderful country we have. The best-known socialist in the country happens to be a millionaire with 3 houses. What I miss here?
So, all of the candidates who talk trash about, quote, socialism, united against Sanders and threw their support to Biden, who, after winning the South Carolina primary, gained huge momentum and won most delegates after that. Biden became the oldest candidate ever nominated by a major political party, and it was his 3rd time running. He chose Kamala Harris, who actually had some harsh words for him in a debate when she was running against him for the nomination, as his running mate. I guess they made up and stuff. Trump had little opposition getting renominated by the Republicans, although folks like former U.S. Representative Joe Walsh and former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld ran against him. You may remember Weld from the 2016 election. Mike Pence was again Trump's running mate. After their strongest finish in a presidential election yet in 2016, the Libertarian Party felt confident as it nominated its first female candidate, Jo Jorgensen, a college professor and activist from South Carolina, with Spike Cohen, an activist from Maryland, as her running mate. Both Trump and Biden were supposed to debate 3 times, but one of them didn't happen after Trump got COVID and maybe almost died. The first time they debated, that was a bit of a train wreck.
You were a senator, and
you're
by
the
way,
worst
you were
president America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
You know, it was kind of like 2 old men yelling at each other. Mostly due to social media feeds and online echo chambers, the country remained perhaps as divided as it had been since the Civil War. However, throughout his presidency, Trump's approval rating never really got that high, and even some Republicans, like those who formed the political action committee, the Lincoln Project, thought Trump was recklessly leading the country down a path toward fascism. However, Trump still had tens of millions of loyal followers who believed every word he said and trusted him with their lives. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns, Trump held as many rallies as he could, and many of his supporters showed up not wearing masks, a sign that many of them still downplayed the severity of the virus. On the other side, Biden didn't get out much to campaign, and when he did, he had more low-key, kind of boring, quote, rallies in which supporters stayed in their cars and awkwardly honked their horns at him since he couldn't hear them clapping. And here are the results. Joe Biden won, becoming the 46th president in American history. Biden received 306 electoral votes and 51.3% of the popular vote. Trump received 232 electoral votes and 46.9% of the popular vote. As divided as the country was, Biden won the largest percentage of the popular vote of any challenger to an incumbent since the election of 1932. Jo Jorgensen finished 3rd with 1.2% of the popular vote. Kamala Harris became the 49th vice president in American history and the first female vice president in American history. Whoa-ness. Trump was the first president since George H.W. Bush to not get reelected. Biden became the oldest president in American history as soon as he was sworn in. Yep, he was older than Ronald Reagan when Reagan left the presidency. Probably at least partially due to the expansion of mail-in voting, this election had the highest highest voter turnout since the election of 1900, even though most Americans weren't that excited about Biden, who seemed to be just a return to the status quo. That didn't matter. Most of them seemed to be voting out of fear of 4 more years of Trump. Despite it not being that close of an election, Trump refused to say he lost, claiming there was widespread voter fraud. His diehard supporters, of course, also absolutely refused to accept the results, believing there was widespread voting fraud. However, Trump's own administration found no evidence of widespread voting fraud, and after dozens of courts, filled with many Trump appointees, I should add, dismissed challenges to the election, many felt the last chance they had to prevent Biden from becoming president was preventing Congress from certifying the electoral vote count. Tragically, on January 6th, the day Congress was supposed to do that, a mob of hundreds of Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol. Ultimately, 5 died, including 1 police officer, and dozens were injured. The rioters occupied, vandalized, and looted the Capitol for hours before the National Guard finally came in to kick them out and make arrests. Many criticized Trump for inciting the violence and not doing enough to protect the Capitol. He even lost his social media accounts. Yep, not only was his presidency over, but so was his ability to tweet to his devoted followers. Oh, and the House of Representatives impeached him again, this time for, quote, incitement of insurrection, making Trump the only American president to be impeached twice.